Nice.
Hello, welcome, Genevieve. Hi, today we are talking with Genevieve Engleman, who is the founder, owner, and everything of the Remote OT, a company based in Maryland. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Do you want to give a quick context for your business, what you've been doing since COVID started, really? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an occupational therapist. Like you mentioned, I started this private practice called the Remote OT. It was initially started to be a little bit of a play on words in two concepts of the remote being telehealth, because it is a telehealth practice. And then remote is for individuals that are in areas where they are unable to access healthcare. The real passion and heart of the practice, I always tell people, is to reach underserved, vulnerable populations that are struggling to access high quality healthcare services. So taking that concierge type model that more affluent individuals are able to access nowadays, where they can just contact their physician or therapist easily, it was replicating that same model, but for those populations that are less accessible either by geographical distance, where being able to provide telehealth services gives them the opportunity to access occupational therapy services in a way that they previously were not.
Wonderful. Thank you. And you've been doing this. The other part of the remote is that you started it during when everybody went remote, right?
Yes. That was like when I really launched out. Like, I've been a therapist for over a decade, and I've worked in hospitals and I've worked in clinics. And, I really during that time felt like I was always, kind of building these bottom lines, not always reaching these people that needed it most. And then unfortunately, I had no control over like the billing. And so, individuals were getting stuck with these bills that were devastating from services if their insurance, was not covering it. And so during the pandemic, I thought, we've got to do more. We've got to step up for people in a bigger way. And so I launched the practice to offer, telehealth services, thinking this is better than nothing, right? Like, as at least individuals could have access to care. If, people were driving an hour to try to get their kids to therapy services, they wouldn't have to do that anymore. We could come in home with this virtual context and deliver occupational therapy services in a context that I believe it was built for.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to that later, especially with the advantage of having maybe the people within the home being able to be engaged for the first time ever. But let's start at the basics. Exactly what is occupational therapy? And you and I have had this catchphrase. It's more than fine motor, so make sure you launch into that.
That's it. I mean, that was your great kick there, because when I first started talking with you, you were like, it's so much more than just fine motor. And I think as an educator, in the school setting, a lot of times you see an OT come in and do sensory and do handwriting, and we're very limited to those two boxes. In clinics, you'll see them, I used to be a hand therapist. I did splinting, wound care, maybe you do some range of motion. So people are familiar with like, okay, I've seen an occupational therapist in some capacities, or I know someone who had an OT. So then they think that's defined, what they can do. Yeah. The most fascinating thing to me about occupational therapy is our scope of practice really includes the entire range of activities of daily living. So that can go from sleep to, functioning in school, to functioning in play, functioning in work, anything that involves that you do during the day. So some people know the occupational therapist is, you help them brush their teeth and comb their hair and go to the bathroom. Yeah, that's a very basic level of it, but it goes all the way up to instrumental activities of daily living, which include opening a bank account, getting a driver's license.
Wow.
Independent living skills. So, we had at the Remote OT, we did a foster care program where individuals that were aging out of foster care that were lacking those independent living skills could now, work on them and set up the things we need, to perform in daily life, things we take for granted when we pick these traits up along the way. If we were lucky enough to have parents that taught us how to do things, or mentors and other people in the community that showed us how to do things, we will acquire these traits. But if we are in, again, one of those underserved populations like foster care, where you're in survival mode, you're just trying to get those basic functions met. Do I have a shelter? Do I have food? You're not able to then do the skills you need to get that driver's test. Who's practicing driving with you? Do you even have a car? I work with a women's shelter, for instance, and these women have been through very difficult situations personally, but now they have children that they're trying to parent for. They've never had enough education on terms of development for the child. So they feel lost. They don't know about that. They have their own, mental health concerns that are maybe going on as well. So an occupational therapist in those contexts for mental health is huge because we address the activities of daily living.
Which
So
it's like a wraparound service for lack of better, like something to scaffold it to, but that's what it sounds like. It's the whole thing.
That's it. I always tell people, like, physical therapy, they can do the walking and the strengthening. Speech therapy, we know that's got the verbal communication, but occupational therapy fills in all the gaps. You get your physician, you go to for your well visit. You've got, maybe if you need surgery, you have all these other providers that fit into these neat boxes. We are that catch-all then, where you're like, who do I go to for this?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Okay, so you mentioned, I think, the big areas, like you're talking about filling in the gaps now, so almost granular or more specific case-based type stuff. But the big picture you said once was physical, cognitive, and sensory. Do you want to talk a little bit about those areas and then talk about how it kind of funnels down to fill in the gaps?
Yes, absolutely. So physical, like I said, I kind of had worked in like hands, orthopedics. That was a very physical practice, right? If we do gait training, neuromuscular education, we're really working on the body. Now, some people would say, oh, well, how do you translate that in telehealth? I'm straight up, the splinting and the wound care, I have not figured out how to do that via telehealth. But everything else, caregiver training, I feel like it's very important that it's not the therapist that always knows how to best treat the client, but that the individuals that spend the most time with the client know how to serve them well. And so it's a lot of education, it's a lot of training, and then the other bodies in the room are literally the bodies in the room. So we can still address that physical component. And I think it's more impactful then because, your therapist is with you 1, 2, maybe 3 hours a week, they're not with you all those other hours. So it's more impactful, in my opinion, for a parent to know how to provide those physical interventions. I can train you with direction and cueing, and then you can deliver that service onto the child and then use it in your day-to-day. Same thing with the cognitive is, if I'm addressing the cognition, that's great that I can assess it. I can tell you which areas we want to work on and we can come up with strategies, but then you need to implement it into your daily life and you need to give me that feedback on what's working or not. Otherwise, I'll miss the mark over and over again. So it's, these caregivers are integral into the system. Unfortunately, in other settings, more those old clinic settings or, the hospital setting where the client gets dropped off by the caregiver has no idea what's happening in therapy, comes and picks them up. I mean, they're getting benefits. Of course, there's respite, there's getting that break, but they're unable to carry over is a struggle versus when I am coming literally into your home like this and seeing what's happening now. Mm-hmm. I can address things on a more real world level than if you got all dressed up and ready and headed over to the clinic and then we're with novel context, it's different stuff. And I can make, you do all sorts of things here on my exercise equipment. The second you go back home, you're like, I can't replicate. I don't have that material.
Exactly. I can speak to that as a parent that has a child in a virtual service. It's not OT, but it's not like I'm taking him out of school and then, okay, now we're going to this. After he has a snack when he gets home on Wednesdays, we turn it on for a half an hour. I'm listening and I'm right there. And throughout the week, there's definitely not scheduled speech time for him throughout the week from me, but yeah. I do hear him say a word and I know how the provider is addressing it. So I can say, and when, it's really important to have that virtual component with caregivers there. It's mind blowing to me that it took a pandemic to kind of shift that and bring that model out. And I'm sure it's here to stay, based on what's best for the children or the provider. And and
it's not always, I always say, it's not always maybe the best match. There's definitely you have to, with your providers, you should definitely take the time to get to know them. That's why I offer like the free screening and stuff, is to give people time that they can meet me and see if they feel, because if you don't feel comfortable with your therapist, you're already stunting the chances of progress, right? So we need to feel a connection. We need to feel that we can trust each other, and then we can build that rapport faster, and then we can get to the, real work quicker. If we feel uncomfortable, if it doesn't feel like, I don't want to open up, I don't want to show them what's really going on, then they can't really address all the needs in a way that maybe would maximize the progress.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's good to, still look at it as specific to the individual, any part of it.
That's,
Like this,
yeah,
right?
client-centered.
Yeah. All right. So we've kind of touched on a few of the things that we scripted out here, but let's talk about your intention, your vision of accessibility for all. If you wouldn't mind kind of talking about that vision.
Yeah. So my real dream is that, like I said sort of in the beginning, that this is an accessible service for individuals that are underinsured or feel limited even, by their current plans, or I don't ever want essentially cost to be a barrier to care.
Yeah.
And so that's really what I end up saying to families a lot of times. So we have, a sliding scale rate. We really negotiate on a price point that is sustainable. The other thing is I don't need, you paying a lot up front and then feeling like, okay, well, I better limit this service. I can only do a couple of visits. I can't afford this. So I really work with the families. What is a sustainable rate? Think beyond just an hourly rate for the week. Think about if we were following and working with your child for weeks and weeks and weeks, possibly a year, what would you be able to sustain? And that's what we should set it at. So we make this, custom pricing situation in order to include anyone and everyone at all different socioeconomic statuses so that no one feels that they're shut out of this. We take Medicaid, we take, Blue Cross, we take some major insurances that we can go through. But even if that's a limitation for you, if you have a high deductible, a high out-of-pocket max, and you're like, yeah, I have insurance, but I still can't afford this, let's go self-pay. Let's set a rate that is manageable for the long term. Because, progress, especially with children, they're changing every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's more important, I feel like, that you're accessible to them throughout a longer duration of time instead of just these very brief encounters when you don't really, need it the most. Another thing I always tell the clients is like, to reach out to me between sessions, because life happens between sessions. It's really frustrating, I think, for a parent if their child is having an excellent day today, and then today is the day we go to therapy, and then tomorrow they have a full-blown tantrum. Emotional regulation is a huge thing occupational therapists work on. If you're struggling with behaviors or the ability to stay regulated, if your child seems to be reacting, what you feel like is over the top to things, there are ways to bring that down and increase that executive functioning skills. That's where an OT could help, if needed.
So you encourage your parents to reach, or, your caregivers to reach out when needed, not just come in those isolated times, turn on their screen or whatever. Okay. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that they can always reach out. They can shoot me a text. I always tell them, if I have an opening, let's jump on now. Because again, if your child is just having one of those days, which as parents we know, where everything, that's the day, if it was my child, that's the day I need these support services, not the day where they're doing really well and everything's fine,
Or even seeing, the provider on the screen, the halo effect clicks in right away.
That's it.
I know.
That's it. Sometimes just having someone else come in and just break that pattern for a second. And it's like, it's no fault of the parent. I think that concept of it takes a village really applies, especially now. We all feel so isolated. We all feel like, we can't do the things we used to do and see the number of people we used to see. So not that therapy is the answer for everyone, but for people really struggling, this could be the support that helps us get through these really difficult times we're in right now.
Yeah. So your approach of it takes a village is part of your driving factor in your vision. Okay. Who is your ideal client, and at what point should parents seek services from you?
I mean, the ideal client is interesting because I feel like I'm always like, it's hard for me to find someone that's not my ideal client. I think, like I said, the struggle is I cannot do splinting like I used to do, like those custom orthotics, and I can't do wound care. So those would not be the ideal. Basically, anyone else. We see individuals from the NICU to the nursing home. So any age, I think, there is that requirement of having technology, which that struggle. So, we try to make it more inclusive where if you don't have the ability to video chat, you can call us on your cell phone. We can just do it over the phone. We're trying to make it more inclusive so that it's not just limited to people that have internet and have the ability to do a video chat conference like this.
So I just ask, what kind of things have you, and we're talking about accessibility for all. What have you encountered in terms of that piece of accessibility for all? And what are some ways that you've gotten around that or found the resource for those clients?
Yeah, I found what's fascinating is that a lot of people have access to internet, more so than I thought. There are huge gaps of people that did not. But then when the pandemic swung in, a lot of these individuals that maybe before did not have access, the school systems were providing hotspots, different organizations, elderly organizations were providing hotspots to homes so that people could increase their access to the internet. That being said, not everyone still has it, right? There's big swaths of people that do not have access to the internet, which can be mind-blowing for all of us that have it. Like, oh my gosh, there's still people. Yes, there are still people. However, libraries are still open, and so individuals can go sit in there and access public Wi-Fi if needed. But I just urge them then, if we don't have the ability to do it over the phone, I mean, the good thing about Google Meets is that you can download the app, and if you have a data plan that's manageable, you can conduct it on the phone. But if the video is too much, and sometimes the video itself can be like intense for some individuals.
Yes.
So like I said, just giving a call, having someone to talk to and run ideas by. I think a lot of times as parents, especially with challenging situations, we feel like we have no one to talk to about this, or we've tried to bring it up to different providers who quickly were like, oh, they'll grow out of it, or it'll take care of itself. And you're like,
have a medicine.
That's it. And you're like, okay, but meanwhile, my child is a really picky eater and I'm struggling with this 4 to 5 times a day. I need help now. Like, and who do I talk to about this? That is where like an occupational therapist can come in with some strategies, some support to just, add to that team of care, make that coordinated care approach a little bit easier to help that child progress. Because in the end, the main goal of occupational therapy is for every client that they are participating in life in a way that's meaningful to them, that they don't feel, oh, I wish I could be doing this and I can't because of these hurdles. That's the worst feeling for anyone, right? Where you want to engage, you want to participate fully, and you can't figure out how. That is where an occupational therapist really specializes in task analysis to facilitate that engagement.
Okay. Thank you so much for describing all of this. And that's a unique model in itself. You just give me a call. If you can't make it work with Google Meets, it's okay. Still talk to you, and I will talk you through something to make it a little more less stressful.
Yes. Less stressful. We all need to take down the stress these days. It's, it's through the roof. And like, if someone can be there, sometimes it's interesting to me. It's like kids, it's like as parents, we know kids always want to show us stuff. They want to, hey, I want to show you this. I want to show you my game, or they're always staring at a screen and they maybe don't want to show us, but they're doing something. As a parent, of course, in an ideal world, we would, meet the child where they're at and we would listen to them. But as a parent, we're working, we're trying to keep the house clean, we're busy. It's really nice, especially with special needs individuals, that you have this other resource that they can reach out to. So I have a client, for example, who will be going to a doctor's appointment today. The mother knows he's going to be sitting for an hour in that waiting room. He has autism. That's a very difficult time for him. So let's schedule the occupational therapy then. That is something I never could do in person, right? Like, I can't come and meet you in the waiting room and work on our goals while you're waiting. Make that time purposeful instead of him wandering around the room and doing other things, that is less meaningful or doesn't help him progress towards his goals. So I
will be able to engage him in that session.
That's it.
Okay. I love it. It's so outside the box.
That's it. I can come in, think outside the box, and meet him during those times where that family can identify, this is a challenging time for us during the day. Can we schedule a session there?
Brilliant. I love it.
Or I've done sessions in the car. If you've got, some people have the Wi-Fi in their car, they have a data plan that permits for that. Your child is sitting in that car and it's an hour drive. And instead of how we all know how car rides can go, wouldn't it be more valuable that you're working with your therapist during that time? Check it off. It's like, 2 birds, 1 stone kind of approach.
I love it. All right, Genevieve, is there anything else that you'd like us to know about you or your practice?
It's just, if anyone needs help out there or feels they're struggling, feels alone, any mental health. I think a lot of times an interesting thing is occupational therapy is founded in mental health. And in this day and age, we know that mental health is such a big deal.
Wow.
But I'm spending so much time educating people or re-educating people about the fact that we are mental health providers. So we're here for that anxiety, depression, bipolar, OCD, all those diagnoses. That is meant for occupational therapy. How is it different than a psychologist? We are more of an outcome-driven practice. So psychology is more of the process, and we do have short-term goals. We have long-term goals. We are working towards that engagement, like I said. So we approach the same diagnosis differently. But there's no reason why, if you have a psychologist, why you're not also seeing an occupational therapist to help supplement, because these challenges are big and they take more than one provider. So don't limit yourself to one provider. When you need support, go out there and look for all the support you can find.
Thank you. This has been, it's still very eye-opening for me, even as long as we've known each other. We've talked about what OT is. It's still very eye-opening to understand the depth and breadth of what the service can do and what your field covers. And you just blew the lid off it again for me. I didn't understand that. This is a very valuable tool, and you've developed a model that is more accessible than it traditionally was pre-COVID. So thank you so much for all you're doing.
Of course. And thank you for what you're doing, helping get the word out, because that's the biggest component is, people don't know what occupational therapy is or don't know how it can help. And without individuals like you helping me share the word,
Absolutely. And you can work outside of Maryland, right? Because you're remote. You can do that.
I'm remote. Now, if we're billing your insurance,
right, different story.
But there are programs we offer that's occupation-based coaching. And that's how we can kind of cross the state lines, is that we do a different model where it's, very similar, but essentially, like I said, we can't bill your insurance if you're outside of Maryland, but down the line, there are these occupational therapy compacts that are starting where states in different areas, there are 10 states that will join one compact. So it's coming. That's down. That's like to be continued. That's coming. And then soon I'll be able to be like, oh, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, all these states, then you can really roll it out. But that's in the works. That's coming.
Okay. So in the meantime, yes, you do. Maybe not with insurance, but you offer the coaching option, which is similar, but not exactly the same. It's not going to go to encourage insurance. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. You. Okay.
Well, I don't know how to stop it. Oh, bear with me. Stop recording. I'm gonna have to